like much like you were talking about the Gutenberg press, right? I mean, Gutenberg press reduces the input from an economic productive activity standpoint, but as you also pointed out, it completely transforms the religious landscape in Europe, and possibly you can argue many other parts of the world. And so for today's technological inventions, I feel maybe we're not discussing enough the social, cultural, and changes to our values that these technological inventions inevitably engender.
Well, I think certainly whenever you change the world, you change not just the economy, you change the society, and therefore you change politics. And the best example of this I can think of is in 1760, the United Kingdom was run by about 150 to 200 families. They're the only ones who counted politically. By 1860, the United Kingdom was being run by the middle class, not by the aristocracy. And the reason was the Industrial Revolution greatly empowered the middle class. Suddenly there was a way of becoming very, very, very rich, other than through land, which is the power base of the aristocracy. And in 1827, a young British novelist coined the word millionaire. He actually borrowed it from the French in order to describe this new, very rich class. They didn't have land, they weren't traders, but they had factories, and he called them millionaires. The young British novelist went into a different line of work. His name is Benjamin Disraeli.
Yeah, that's right. So if I can push further on that a little bit, so what's your sense on if the Industrial Revolution leads to the creation of a middle class, and that obviously changes our politics? I also talk about, in my book, one of the other big implications of the Industrial Revolution for our society, which was this, I think you were alluding to it, this battle between labor as a factor of production almost, and the people who were in that class, with the other class that was the capitalist class or the industrial capitalist class. So there's that class conflict, and that sees eventually in Europe also, but elsewhere also, this idea of a welfare state emerge, because that's the only way you can manage the politics of this class conflict that many famous folks have written about. Not to mention just Marx, but many people have written about that class conflict. So if you were to try and pull out some learnings for today's technological revolution and what I call the great tech game, what are your thoughts on the key societal implications that we are starting to see?
I'm not at all certain that I know. Power will shift, but how it will shift is, I think, I don't know. I'm not sure anybody else does either. We're just going to have to find that out. And we're going to have to learn what new rules are needed to make our new society work. For instance, right now, we have discovered, thanks to Elon Musk, by the way, when he blew up Twitter, that the United States government was stepping all over these things like Twitter and Google in order to get them not to convey information that the United States government didn't want them to convey. This was a patent violation of the First Amendment. They would say, well, we're just preventing misinformation, except that misinformation had a bad habit of turning into real information. And so, we're going to have to develop rules to keep the government's thumb out of the social media. And a million other things we're going to have to figure out these rules for. But what particular individuals are going to be better off and which ones worse off, or at least not as dominant as they used to be. I think, Wall Street is not as dominant as it used to be, but it still has plenty of clout, and that's not going to change. Money always has clout in any economic system.
Yeah, but so I'll share a couple of thoughts. One is, one can argue that today Wall Street, the book that you wrote on Wall Street, today if someone was writing that book, they might say Sand Hill Road, or they might say Silicon Valley is the global power here, where both money and technology tend to reside. And the returns that capital wants today, the returns that Wall Street also wants, can only come from technology firms today. Hence the real power lies there. And so that power is shifting, a new elite in a way getting created. So if there was the industrial capitalist class, then there was the bankers, Today one can argue it's the tech titans of our world where power resides. The other piece that seems to be happening where people are worried is when you talk about the different socioeconomic classes in a society, if the Industrial Revolution, with all its imperfections, leads to creation of this middle class that you were referring to, people are worried that that middle is hollowing out with technology. That there's the elites, and there's a great concentration of wealth, power happening there. If Benjamin Disraeli comes up with the term millionaire that time, today people are struggling to come up with whether it's trillionaire or where this billionaire term will end up finally, because there's great concentration of wealth at the top. But then you're finding that the tech firms also tend to not employ as many people as industries tended to, or factories tended to. And so now people are worried generally, and in a country like India especially, where you have a massive population, you're really worried that technology is replacing jobs rather than adding to the productivity of the people who are employed currently. So there's this worry that the middle class will hollow out, and you will have only jobs that are low value add, like delivery workers, cab drivers, and possibly even that gets replaced with drones and autonomous driving cars. And so there's that real concern. And then the third piece that I'll also tell you I've been thinking a lot about is this idea of if the of the second great divergence. If the Industrial Revolution leads to the first great divergence that our world has known, as you know, people have written about how there was this suddenly, like the Western European nations, the industrialized nations, see this massive spike in their growth rates, and the countries that are not able to industrialize or not allowed to industrialize as colonies or some of those colonial powers see very, very slow, if not negative growth rates. And you see this great divergence between nations suddenly. And today, and you can argue that in the second half of the 20th century, many of those East Asian nations, China, Korea, Taiwan, including India over the last few decades, have managed to reduce that divergence. But now people are worried that on the international scale, that with this kind of concentration of tech power, concentration of tech inventions, concentration of wealth in a few individuals, few firms, you're seeing again a second great divergence between nations, not just within nations, but also between nations.